First principles thinking is a mental model that we often explore on our blog. Have you noticed any downsides to using it, or is it usually a good approach?
The primary downside is it's really difficult. It's really difficult to, and let me step back and just briefly define what first principles thinking is, in case someone watching this doesn't know what that means. It's a way of taking a complex system and distilling it to its non-negotiable fundamental raw materials. So you do that and then you build it back up. The analogy I give in Think Like a Rocket Scientist is like reasoning by analogy or copying what others is doing is sort of like being a cover band where you're playing somebody else's music. Whereas first principles thinking, you go back to the fundamental raw materials of music, which are the notes, and then you build an original song from scratch. That is first principles thinking. It's really difficult to do because a lot of what we do in life is informed by what we've done before, but also by what others are doing around us. And first principles thinking, I mean, if you take it to an extreme, it can also be really inefficient because we learn by emulating other people. Like everything from learning how to walk, learning how to talk comes from copying others and modeling others. And so I think part of the difficulty comes from picking what to question because you can't go through life questioning every single thing you do. Picking what to question and also using knowledge in a way that will inform, not constrain. So knowledge is really useful, of course. Knowing what other people have done, knowing what's worked for other people and what hasn't worked is really useful. And you can't completely shut out knowledge. And so the trick with using first principles becomes, how do you use knowledge to inform what you're doing as opposed to constrain it? So one example I give in Think Like a Rocket Scientist is reusability of rockets. So for decades, rockets that carried their payload into orbit couldn't be reused. They would plunge back into the ocean or burn up in the atmosphere, requiring a new rocket to be rebuilt again. Now imagine doing the same thing for commercial flights, right? Like you fly, I live in Portland, Oregon, you fly from Portland to Los Angeles, the plane, the passengers deplane, and then someone steps up to the plane and just torches it. That's basically what we did for rockets for decades. Now, NASA's space shuttle was partially reusable, so some components of it could be refurbished and reused, but it was really expensive because the space shuttle was a really complicated machine, and so refurbishing and reusing the space shuttle actually cost more than building an entire shuttle from scratch. So if you look at that, and if you're, say, entering aerospace and thinking about building your own rockets, and you look at that, and you know that reusability didn't work for NASA, well, that knowledge can be used to constrain, right? You can say, well, it didn't work for NASA, so it's not going to work for me. So I'm not even going to bother trying to create reusable rockets. But if you're using knowledge to inform, the approach becomes slightly different. So you don't ignore what NASA has done, but you look and say, okay, so reusability didn't work for NASA's space shuttle, but why didn't it work? In other words, what was the underlying cause for this? It's not that all reusability is unworkable. It's that the particular reusability that NASA was using with respect to the space shuttle, which was a really complicated machine, didn't work. But if you have a less complicated rocket, then reusability might be an option. So the trick, again, is to take what you know and use it to inform what you do next, but not to constrain it. And that line between informing and constraining can be really hard to draw.